There he is. Hey, Richard.
Hello.
Richard just got blue jeans.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We're going to get started here in just a minute, guys. We're just making sure the Facebook Live is up and running, okay?
Yeah,
I
we're
can
up
see
and running.
Facebook. Hello.
Can see all three of you on there.
On Facebook. Okay, sorry.
Sure.
Patricia, just keep an eye on it. It's not loading on my phone. That's why I thought it wasn't working out. So again, happy Monday, everyone. I hope everyone had a happy 4th of July Independence Day. I know it was pretty busy here around Long Beach, as I'm sure it was out in Calabasas, especially in Orange County. I heard it was very busy, but I hope you guys had a safe and wonderful weekend and didn't lose any fingers to the fireworks. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about a couple documents, and I say a couple because I think we can tag on one extra document here. So we're going to talk about the request for repairs. So when you're going through a transaction, as we know, the request for repairs is a very important addendum to the contract, right? It's something that needs to be submitted in many cases, and it's important to really understand the nuances to what you can use this contract for and really what its importance is. So today we have a couple special people with us. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves? We have Richard, why don't you go first?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Richard Dascom, and I'm the broker at Keller Williams Coastal Properties. And that's what I know.
I'm Amy Taviani with Keller Williams Calabasas. Nice to meet you.
Calabasas in the house. Good. Well, thank you guys both for joining us. You are experts in your own right, of course, for this contract. So I'm just going to kind of open it up a little bit for the two of you at first. So explain to me kind of what is the request for repairs? Let's say I'm a new agent, I have no idea what it is. What is it, and kind of when is a good time for me to use this in my transaction?
Well, contractually, you use it after you've done the home inspection and the buyer knows what the condition of the property is and is looking for the seller to do some kind of repairs to it, even though the contract says as is, even if your counteroffers and everything says as is, buyers still like to ask for something. So that's where it's used. And sometimes you can get smoke detector only. Sometimes you get a list of 45 items. And it just, many times it opens up negotiation again. It really shouldn't. It's not supposed to. But there are some buyer's agents that do that, or the buyers, whichever is really driving that.
Mm-hmm. Omid, more comments? What do you really use it for?
Yeah, it's like Richard said, it's basically for the buyers to know that, what they're paying for the property, nothing really major pops up, that's not anticipated. So, they're getting their worth value for what they're willing to pay. And this is a great tool to use to make sure that happens for your buyers and you're keeping their best interests in mind. Say usually when you get into your contracts and you have an accepted offer, one of the first calls I do is the inspector, get him out there. And depending on your contingency period, that should be one of the first calls that goes out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's the request for repairs, and then there's the response to the request to the repair, the RRR, the pirate one, right? Right, the triple R. So kind of explain the difference, and what do you look for, maybe as a listing agent, what do you look for in both of those documents?
Well, as a listing agent, I kind of look at what basically comes down to what your seller is willing to work on, right? So buyer's agent's done the inspection and they have a list of things they need to fix. Some of them are not very high as far as cost, some are more costly, and that's basically a discussion you open up with your seller and you go, hey, this is what's going on, this is what popped up on the inspection, and which one are you willing to go? And usually they get a contractor or they have a contractor on hand, and they'll get some costs. Some of them they'll want to fix themselves, and some of them they'll want to not fix and say, you know what, we're going to leave that onto the buyers. And it kind of depends. You know, usually you have a few different ways. You can either come to an agreement on a price for credits or for repairs, or the seller might go, you know what, I don't think that's a big deal, so we may not go either way. So it's really depends on the parties involved how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
I try to set it up when I take the listing or go over offers of, really it's more when I take the listing. If there's little things like smoke detector missing, CO detector, hot water heater not strapped, a lot of times I'll tell them don't do those repairs yet. Let the buyer have a win when they do their home inspection. So we know those are going to come up. We know what the cost is going to be. But let's just let the buyer win by asking for and getting those small little items. And I look for health and safety over upgrades and things. So a GFCI on the outside of the house is more of an upgrade, depending on the age of the home, etc. So the little things we try not to have to do, but then again, if it's going to mean losing the deal, then the seller just needs to pay the $200 for it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to prepare the seller up front for things that they're going to have to face, whether it's as is or not.
Yeah, that's great. Stephanie, you're here. Hi. Hey, there is Stephanie Alatorre from the Calabasas office. Stephanie, you got any questions for the guys? We just kind of started talking and going over the document a little bit.
Yeah, I do, and I apologize if it's already been answered. And Richard kind of touched on it, you know, how he preps his sellers, right? But quick question, because, you know, the home inspection always goes in, you know, to find stuff wrong, and the buyers want to have a laundry list of stuff. So can I ask you, how do you guys, you know, prep your buyers for the request for repairs in the home inspection? Do you kind of let them know, hey, you know, this just gives us, make sure that it's, you know, the house is sound and there's no safety issues? You know, what's your conversation prior to home inspection and prior to request for repairs, if you have one?
Oh, you're a buyer? I don't work with buyers. Go talk to Janine. No, I always have the discussion of health and safety versus upgrades.
Yeah.
But typically it's on death errors. You know, they have the laundry list. That's why I let her deal with buyers. How about you, Amit?
Yeah, you know, buyers I've found they're, you know, they differ in what they see that request for repairs. Some of them do see it as, oh, let me get an opportunity to upgrade stuff, and that usually does not work well with buyers. You know, it's there, it's in working condition and acceptable. Usually they don't see a reason to change that. But it is a good opportunity for things like you said, GFCI outlets. Those are common if they're outside, if they're not grounded. And I usually tell buyers, look, you know, this is a time if anything pops up, like if they've seen something at the property, they may make mention of it. And I said, look, you know, we're going to do a home inspection. And I let them know that, you know, the home inspection is really just more of a visual with the inspector, and you're going to need to get professional people in there. They usually go down the list and say, hey, look, I saw this on the roof, and talk with a, you know, roof contractor. I saw this going on with the plumbing. So what I get them ready for is like, look, this is more of a visual, and these guys do it all the time. And once they do red flag something, then depending on the severity or the importance of what's popped up, I suggest for them to go ahead and seek more professional guidance on this, getting a licensed roofing contractor or getting a licensed sewer, you know, doing the sewer line. So yeah, it all kind of depends on it. But that's my initial conversation with the buyer, that, you know, that's what she can expect. And I let them know that, look, you know, if this doesn't work out for them to go ahead and fix it, then you have an opportunity to do it yourself. Some buyers like to use their own contractor. They would prefer credits instead of getting it repaired. That way they know it's done correctly. And some buyers go through the list and go, well, no, I want it done before I go in. So it's really keeping your buyer in dialogue and being interactive with them and kind of holding their hand through the way until you come to a meeting of the minds and your buyer and the seller agree on that list.
hmm And I think it's important to be said that I feel like your strategy changes with the market, right? Right
Correct.
now, it's so heavily competitive and oversaturated. We have 40, 50 offers on some of our listings right now, that it's important to set those expectations of two things, health and safety, right? When it comes to the request for repairs. Yeah, also, I've encountered, I don't know if you guys have, that of course many of the buyers just want the credits, right? They just want the money because they'll figure out, oh, I can hire my own person to do it or whatnot. But it's important as an agent that we're familiar with about how much these things cost, right? Because the changing all the outlets or whatever, you can't ask for a $2,000 credit, right? Well, depending on the property. And sometimes buyers' expectations, they think that way, right? They'll put a certain dollar amount on it, or they'll Google, how much is it to fix the electrical in my bathroom. So I think it's just important for us to educate ourselves, make friends with contractors, ask them generally how much things cost. That way you can help advise your clients, maybe this isn't reasonable. Let's try to put a reasonable dollar amount on it.
I always joke with sellers that buyers think everything is $5,000.
Right.
Yeah. I've got one for you. I've got a condo with a 31-year-old hot water heater that works.
Yeah.
There you go.
What do you buyers like? I want a new one. Sellers like it works.
Mm-hmm.
Health and safety.
I think it kind of goes also with, the buyers and sellers also when it comes to repairing, they have different avenues. It almost seems like always the buyer, when they give their list of, requests for credits or repairs, they're looking for the best job done at the primo price by a licensed person, and the seller is looking for the same qualified person that's going to do it for the best price and lower price, right? So it's comes down to negotiating that between the two parties that are involved in the transaction.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you guys seeing right now as far as requests for repairs? Especially where it's highly competitive, there are multiple offers, backup offers, so on and so forth. Are the sellers going, hey, I'm not doing anything next? Or are they like, hey, you know what, we're in the escrow, we'll go ahead and accommodate some of the things they're asking or the credit so we can move forward and not, what is the temperament out there when it's coming to request for repairs?
Except for one listing, which I hit the market on Saturday, I had just one offer on the handful that we have in escrow. So I don't know what that one is. I don't know what that's like right now.
Yeah, my experience of it's both. I think sellers right now, because the market's hot, they do have a tendency on maybe saying, no, this is what, this is all I'm going to give, and kind of sticking to that guns. And if you don't want it, that's all we're giving. And some sellers are like, need to sell. They're in a position where they need to move. They are going to work with you, and they're going to give as much as, and I'm sure they have some kind of a bottom line end of it as far as numbers. So they'll go down to that. It all depends on importance of your seller selling right there in that transaction or not.
And setting that up front when you take the listing so they're prepared and all the way down. It's really communication from day one with your client, whether buyer or seller.
And as far as buyers, usually I recommend to my buyers that when we do send the request for repairs in, and when they get it, I have them go through it, highlighted what's important, what they really want on there. I put in my experience, ultimately it's always up to them what they want to do, but I strongly always suggest they bring in a licensed contractor if they have a friend or a family or they know someone, get a referral, and have them either come to the property or take a look at everything and get an estimate or go down the list. At the very minimum, go down the list and say, hey, you know what, this is going to be costly. These are the numbers. This is what it's involved. Sometimes some of the things that may need fixing that pop up could interfere with timelines. So you got to take those also into consideration. Mm-hmm. So I usually try to get some kind of an estimate for the buyers, or have the buyers get that when they put in that request. So it's based on something. It's not just them throwing some arbitrary number out there. So I think that's a good way to go to get a contractor, licensed contractor, for anything that's involved in those requests.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's $5,000.
Yeah, exactly.
That's their
For
mindset.
some reason,
Exactly.
5,000 seems to make everything better, right?
Yep. Yep.
Perfect. I just wanted to share my screen here to actually pull up the document that we're talking about. So yeah, okay, here's my question for you guys. So this is kind of a hot topic, and I know where Richard stands, but I want to hear Omid's opinion. Pest control. Okay. So in theory, some people write it in the RPA, and some people put it on the request for repairs, right? Whether
Yes.
doing section 1 clearance or anything like that. How do you guys feel about it? Do you normally request the repairs being done on this document here? Do you put it in the RPA? Where do you guys kind of put it?
I put it on the request for repairs because it could kind of get complicated when you do put it on the offer. It just seems like, you always have that shot on the RR or request for repairs to, request your section 1s. I think that is a better way to go, just as far as, the loan complications and everything. I think that's just a better way to go it through RR. And it seems to work most of the time. Unless they've disclosed, hey, we're not going to do anything. Then, you're just going to send it to them and they're going to come back with a response saying no. But I found RR to be a good way to go about it and keeping it off the RPA. Of course, it can do both.
Mm-hmm.
I try to have that discussion with the listing agent on the few buyers that I do work with. And I'm seeing now with offers in the last couple of weeks, maybe 1 in 5 is asking for it. I think, like Stephanie was saying, it's a competitive market and buyers are just used to not having to ask for it right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So do you, as a listing agent, when an RPA comes to you and it's written in the RPA, do you have them take it out when you're countering? Or would you rather just have it pop up on the request for repairs?
I like to know the net up front for the client. So we do try to get termite inspections done ahead of time and send back a copy of it with a counteroffer, whether or not it's in the offer itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody knows up front.
Mm-hmm.
And even the one today, the as-is flea house, we did the termite inspection, just so everybody knows what we're looking at. That is one thing the DRE asks for in a file when they're reviewing our files and auditing the office. Is there a termite report?
Mm-hmm.
And I try to get in the habit of just having the report done regardless, so the seller knows what the cost is going to be, and the buyer will too.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially if you're willing to accept a VA offer, right? Because it has to be done with a VA offer, and you are limiting your scope. If you don't have that available, you're going to have to make that available to a VA buyer. So down here on number 2, what kind of reports do you guys normally attach to the RR? Do you attach any of the inspection reports, or just specialty inspection reports? What do you put in there?
Anything that's going to support the numbers on the request for repairs or credits, anything supporting documents I can attach to it, I will. Mm-hmm. And that's basically, substantiating that, hey, this stuff needs to be done. It seems to me, talking both spectrums on seller side and on buyer side, just a little larger numbers and everything else falls in between. I've had sellers that have had requests for $60,000, $70,000 and that the seller has come back with 3. Like, we're just giving you 3. That's all we're giving you. And if you want to walk, you walk. And they accepted it. The buyer accepted it because a lot of that stuff was, part of those just $5,000 items that weren't really there. And on the other side of the spectrum, I've also had buyers that have come with $90,000 in requests for credits and repairs. And believe it or not, we got almost $80,000 of it out of that. Again, it goes back to, the condition of the house and the substantiation of all the, claims on the RR.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we have a couple questions here. I'm looking it up to try to log them on. So, tell me, obviously you're representing a buyer. You do the inspection, and there are some things that pop up, whether some of them, let's say the scenario, some are decorative, things, and then others are health and safety issues. So, how often do you either ask for the repair, ask for a credit, or ask for a price reduction? And tell me kind of your strategies behind those three.
It's really a mix. Decorative stuff, it's very going to be hard to get. I mean, like, it also depends on the seller. Like, if it's, hey, you know what, you want to take the window coverings off because it's broken or something. If it's minute and you got reasonable people on both sides, yeah, they're going to do it. But most likely, they are the main negotiations are going to be on the larger ticket items, 300, 400, 500. It's not going to really make or break a deal for $120. It's when it gets added. And usually I try to push my buyers to ask him for credits or repairs or suggest to them, and they use their common sense that, if you start throwing stuff in there that may not be as important amongst the really important stuff, they'll start taking away from the importance of the important stuff. So let's make this really real and credible, and the stuff that's, you don't want to put out of your pocket out there. And I come back and, depending on what the buyer is willing to do, that maybe they have a friend or cousin that does, I don't know, window work or roof work. It all depends on the situation of the buyer, which way they go. If they don't have a contractor, they don't want to deal with it. Maybe they have kids, and they don't want to deal with it when they move in the house. They're going to push for it to get repaired while it's an escrow. And the ones that, do have the connections or do have the time or they're inclined, they may more push for the credits.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on both sides of the party again, where they're at as far as the transaction.
And the credits are a fine balance because closing costs aren't as much as they had been in the past, so they may not be able to have enough closing costs in order to cover the credits that a buyer asks for.
Right, correct. Absolutely.
So Michelle asked, what's the difference between Section 1 and Section 2 termites? So very roughly, Section 1 is an active wood-destroying pest infestation, generally. Okay. Section 2 usually means the conditions to eventually have an active wood destroying pests happen. So it can be anywhere from damage to, a wet wood, anything like that. It just depends. All that will come through on a termite inspection report. Normally, with a VA loan, Section 1 is required and Section 2 isn't required. But then again, every state and every circumstance is different. But very often, Section 1 is required and or requested by buyers because it's basically saying, I know I'm buying a house with termites and I want to buy a termite-free house. Right?
Absolutely.
And that's termites, that's dry rot,
Exactly.
That's more than just termites.
Right. So again, never use the word, I always discourage using the word termite report, right? It really is a wood destroying pest report because there are more than just termites. So, use that verbiage. So hopefully that makes it clear the difference between 1 and 2.
Just to add to that, Haley, usually you want to take care of the Section 1s definitely in your repairs, right? Because, Richard, maybe you can add to this. When it comes to the lender closing, they're going to want a clearance.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's an impasse, then you got to get, a waiver of termite, and that can get a little, you got to keep everybody in the loop on that.
And they may have agreed, both parties, that there is no termite being done, but the appraiser walks out there and says,
right.
that the house, the roof's falling apart because of termite work, and they're going to call it out and make it happen during escrow. And now you're back to square one because that's a lender requirement, not a buyer requirement at that point.
Yeah. And wouldn't you say grossly? I was surprised because I'm not from here, but almost every home here in the SoCal area has some type of pest damage. I mean, it's a pretty general statement. You know, when I first started
Somewhat common.
yeah, it's so common. It's so common.
One of my inspectors always says you can tent the house today and tomorrow you can have a swarm of termites come by and you got termites again.
Right.
That's another thing. It's good to get that termite inspection also done as soon as possible if your seller hasn't done it, because you know you come across those situations where the house needs to get tented.
Mm-hmm.
Patients have to be done for that. So if that pops up, there's a bunch of coordination that goes on with that. So another inspection that should be done, you know, early on.
I've got one house in escrow right now that I swore was going to be $15,000 in work. It came back at like $4,700. I told the seller, just get it done at this point. You know, it's so ugly the way it sits. You just do it, even though we're selling as is. That way we'll qualify for all the loans. So you just never know sometimes.
Yeah, and I've had it, you know, like we're going escrow and termite comes up and it's got to get tented. You know, they have to get the house ready, and you know your buyers are anticipating it. It's got to air out. You know, by the time they come in, they got to give like indication that it's okay to go ahead and go in the house. So that all of that takes a little bit of coordination as well if that pops up.
That's why my house needs to be tented still. I don't want to do it.
So let me ask you, either one can answer. Do you guys have a little bit, because you know you always have when you get into escrow, you have that whole negotiating process, right? And then this is a whole nother set of negotiating, right? To try to get to the finish line. So what's your like craziest story, a situation that you had between a buyer and a seller of, you know, we all have stories. Do you have anything that you'd want to share with how something went down in the request for repairs?
Well, yeah, I had something similar. I had a contract that almost fell apart. It was over $1 million deal that almost fell apart for a bidet in the bathroom, of all things. It was supposed to be removed. They said, no, we want to keep it. And then, lo and behold, they ended up removing it. And that just everything just kind of like, I told them to move it. And it was so, that was crazy. It was pretty involved. It almost like the buyers were almost going to walk. They're like, you know, they didn't want to play. But yeah, that was a crazy story.
I think it's just when you get the wild reports in, or the wild requests for repairs. When there's a buyer's market, you know, I've written 20, 30 items. And when you're upset in the seller in the seller's market, you're like, you know, pound sand, go to the next one. But yeah, it's always fun when those detailed engineer style buyers, every single thing that's marked on the inspection has to be on the repair request.
Yeah, text overflow.
Yep.
Yeah, TOA. And, you know, like Richard was mentioning, as is, I've come across that on both sides. It really doesn't hold, unfortunately, much water, because as long as your inspection contingency is in place, the sellers are at the call of what the buyers want. So a lot of times my buyers go, well, you know what, this property is as is. What do you think? I tell them the truth. I'm like, you got your inspection contingency. You know, if it's really bad, you know, you can walk. And so that's something to take into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and just because it says as is doesn't mean you can't do a request for repairs.
Right.
And that's something that I'm sure Richard hates to hear as a listing agent, but but as a buyer's agent, you still do it. I mean, really on there, technically the seller doesn't even have to respond to their request for repairs, right? So, you know, it's one of those, being an advocate for your buyer, why not submit it? Maybe they will give you a small credit, or maybe they will fix that faceplate cover that they're concerned about. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think as an agent, it's prudent to, when you're setting up inspections and you do the home inspections, you kind of learn to look for stuff. So, like, if you have a house, you know, everything looks good, and there's a big old tree with roots up doing the, you know, curbside, you might want to suggest to your buyer, hey, you know what, might want to do a certain inspection on this one, you know, just to be on the safe side. If you're seeing a, you know, like a a tree limb from a tree that's, touching the roof and maybe, leaning over the eave a little bit. So those are also things you want to keep an eye on early on to bring more professional on those.
Mm-hmm. And having those affiliates and those phone numbers handy to be able to refer 2 or 3 options for the buyer is very important.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let's talk the seller's response to the request for repairs. So putting on a different hat, when you are responding, can you share some negotiation tools or tactics when you get this big long laundry list from the buyer's agents?
I said, no, it's as is.
Pretty much.
Good to know. If you ever are submitting an offer on Richard Dascom
Right.
Properties, make sure that you know as is as is.
I've had sellers that said, oh, yeah, I know about that. We meant to fix that. Yeah, we'll take care of that. No problem. So, it again, all depends on the seller, their willingness, maybe even the mood they're in the day they get, they get the request. So it all matters.
Yeah.
I've had sellers where they were saying as is, and I send them the inspection before we get the repair request. Just take a look at it so you know what's happening. 2 days later, I get the call, and they'd finished half of the items that were in the report because they just felt bad about how unmaintained their house was or whatever. And then you get the other ones, they don't even want to look at it.
Yeah. So you normally kind of counsel your sellers, look, these are health and safety items, these are not. And then do you try to negotiate that, a little bit that maybe just.
Oh, absolutely. And again, for me, I'm always representing, I'm representing my buyer or seller, so their best interest. And if their best interest is, we really, sometimes it comes to how much money they need to net, and if it's a big cost item, they may not want to drop below that bottom line. So you got to really feel your buyer or seller where they're at. Sometimes buyers really need that credit or repairs. My $5,000 might be a lot of money to them, even $1,200, who knows? Mm-hmm. So it really goes into being in touch with your buyer or seller and really conveying their best interest. And obviously they're going to look to your expertise and your experience in the business to kind of guide them on, like, hey, you know what? I understand, but if you want this, if the transaction to go through is that important to you, this is what I you like moving on, or let that one go and let's hold on to the bigger picture instead of going to the nitty gritty and holding up everything for everyone. So it's communication with your client is really important, whether you're on the buyer or seller side.
And I remind the seller that now we have the report, you're going to have to deal with these items with the next buyer. So let's try to keep this moving forward and find something that works. And maybe it's doing some of the repairs and giving a small credit for the other repairs, or however it can work out for both parties. But they got to deal with all this stuff on the next offer anyway, so might as well try to work it out.
Right. And timelines are so important now, especially with COVID. Say you're doing a 30 or a 45-day escrow, and the buyer may not be aware that some of the repairs they're requesting take a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks to even complete or to get someone out to do it in time. So I think it's important, again, as agents, that we're aware of how much things cost and how long those things take, because it might be worth saving your seller the headache to just give them a credit. Right? Rather than trying to have someone else come into their home and doing work. And, in some instances, for example, like tenting, they're going to be put out of their home, right? Because that has to be done before the close of escrow. So it's just important to keep that in mind as well, I think.
We had 2 interior doors that needed replaced. They were in stock and we started the process. When it was time to order them, they had shut down that mill and they were 6 weeks out. So, COVID is definitely getting in the way of things you wouldn't think of. So credit became the answer at that point.
Yeah, it's inevitable, I think, right now. Yeah. With some projects, they just can't get done.
Exactly.
They just can't get done.
And a big lender today had a hit, and they had to shut the entire office down because of COVID. So now that lender's going to have huge delays. You just don't know on both sides.
That's good. Steph, you got a question?
No, I'm being completely transparent. I mean, because it's just the request for repairs and then the seller's response. It's pretty. It's just another negotiating time, like I said, in the transaction. And every situation is incredibly unique, and we do have, obviously COVID that is having an impact just on everything that we're doing, right? But I feel. Do you guys feel that everyone, I feel that for the most part, everyone's being pretty relatively reasonable. I mean, obviously I don't get all the broker calls, right? But it seems like everybody wants the perfect end result, right? That they truly want it to work out. And I think the buyers understand that, okay, I am in this deal and I may not be able to get into another deal on another house anytime soon, right? So they more accommodating. Because I really don't. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So, this is another statement from Michelle, and then we'll ask Angela's here. So, in a nutshell, correct me if I'm wrong about this statement, Mr. Broker. Okay. So, if an agent has submitted a request for repairs and nothing has been agreed upon. Okay, right? Maybe they're going back and forth. Inspection contingency, and all the other contingencies are passed. The dates of them having to be lifted are passed. There is no obligation to let me see if I'm reading this. There is no obligation to the seller to have to close those negotiations, right? The buyer is still obligated from the contingencies, correct?
Right. Yeah. The seller can issue a notice to perform, and the buyer doesn't have a choice but to either cancel or release contingencies and move forward.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, Michelle, so I hope that answers she asked a very specific type question, but basically, again, unfortunately, the request for repairs is an elective document to go back and forth. Your contingencies are not elective, right? Those are built into your contract and are built into the RPA. So they really are, even though they're connected, they're pretty separate when it comes to enforcement.
I normally say that the buyer's in control once the contract's agreed to and executed. But that's the only spot really where the seller has the ability to put the brakes on. If they get a better, higher offer, of course they're going to put the brakes on and try to get this buyer out of the way.
Yeah.
In this market, it's going to see it more often. You get into a buyer's market, and the seller's going to be kissing the buyer's feet to stay in. So depends on where you're at.
So Michelle, hopefully that answers your question. If not, call your broker. Sounds like you might be in a mess. Okay, so Angela has a good question. So we talked a little bit about helping the request for repairs run a little bit more smoothly, or anticipating, what they might request. What are some of the documents and or inspections that you would recommend getting with your sellers before actually going active or getting into contract?
Until I saw the SPQ and the TDS, I wouldn't even know where to start there. But if we get it and they say that they've had the toilet back up a couple of times, then it's time to have them do a sewer up front. If every time the AC comes on, the lights flicker, let's get an electrician out there. But truly, until I've gone through those questions with them, I wouldn't know where to start with that one.
Mm-hmm. So you don't ask them to do or advise them to do a termite inspection before you list? Or
I typically wait until we get offers in, just because they do expire. And like I said, I've had 3 that I had pre-COVID that just now got offers this past couple of weeks. So all of those would have expired if I'd done that.
That's good.
Right, and I think it would be a good idea to talk with your sellers, because usually they know some of the things that are wrong with the house. If their water's running at a low pressure, or draining, or bathrooms aren't draining, or if there's things wrong, it would just it'd be a good idea to have them do those before. So again, dialogue with your sellers.
Mhm. I think what you guys said is important to really read the SBQ and the TDS, before you start requesting things because it is going to cost your seller money, but it is going to tell you a lot of information about maybe what could pop up, right? Like you guys said, plumbing issues or AC issues, or a lot of properties say have had tenting or termite. They say, oh, I do it every year, or I do it every 3 years, whatever that is. And then usually they share that information. It might just get you a little bit of a jump on it, but you also don't want to have all your sellers go out of pocket and do all this stuff, and then your buyers may never request it,
Right.
or they may be an all cash buyer that wants it completely as is, right? You never really know.
With post-COVID now, I'm paying for the seller's home warranty on my listings. And we just got 2 fans replaced on one, hot water heaters being looked at on another.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something you can offer to your sellers as a benefit, and it will help them limit their expenses if they truly have something they're not aware of.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's going to cost me $30 because things are selling so fast post-COVID.
Yeah.
So you're doing the seller's home warranty?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm in a transaction now where I'm representing the buyers, and the sellers knew there was something with the foundation, and they went ahead and proactively went ahead and did the foundation inspection and did the reports. They got a licensed contractor. Obviously, we're going to look at it very carefully as buyer side, but they were proactive. They knew that this is something, if they want to sell the house, pop up.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to come back and have a lawsuit by them somewhere down the road. They went ahead and did that, and we appreciate it. So that made our job a little easier. Are we going to look further into this for my buyers, or this inspection look good? Are we going to do our own inspection? But at least we know it's there,
Mm-hmm.
The buyers aren't going into it blind, saying, oh, you didn't tell us about this. Well, that helps.
Mm-hmm. And it's important to remember to keep all that documentation and make sure your sellers know that, right? Know who the company is, know when the work was done, have the invoices, have all of that ready, because when you do get into a transaction, you can then, show that as proof. Just because if you're not specific, especially in the request for repairs, and you say you just want something repaired, it could be Uncle Joe Bob, who doesn't have a license, who, just fixes houses here and there, right? So just make sure that you advise your sellers to keep all those documents too.
I haven't had like a water softener removal as part of the request.
Mm.
What it was used for a while, they weren't using it. It was like they didn't need it, and that was one of the. And it came down to the end of the transaction, they'd forgotten about it, and so we're like, hey, we want to remove a contingency, so they had to get somebody out there ASAP to remove it. So, and that's part of us as agents also to aid the buyer, make sure those stuff are done, because they may be busy, they may not be all there, and they're relying on us to really, I don't know if it's our responsibility, but it is kind of, if you want to give that higher quality service, to go through those and make sure it's done and everything's on time. And you got 2 days before you got a contingency removal coming up, and whatever it's taken, it's going to be 4 days worth of work. You need to get on that ASAP.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the cities in South Bay would require a permit to remove the water softener. So you've also got to know your local requirements.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Again, have a contractor that that you can speed dial with those kind of questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have a question now. So I know it's not related to, well, it's kind of related to request for repairs, etc. It's the one step further. We've already approached on it, the notice to perform. So are you seeing more of that now? More sellers being, proactive at adhering to the timelines, or is it still? Are you seeing any change in that at all in sellers' behavior with the MTB or the MB?
Richard?
The MD what?
Well, the notice to perform, notice to buyer.
Oh.
Are you seeing sellers being more proactive on making them adhere to the timelines?
Yes. Yeah. If you don't, if they got a backup offer, so I try to go verbal first and not get the sellers too antsy about what's happening. but we've had to have it served a couple times in the last few weeks. And then working with some of the agents in the office, where they're submitting the notice to perform the 3 days before or 2 days before it's due, so that the day that their contingency is up, they can cancel if they want to because they have better offers in the background. I don't like that kind of negotiation, but you got to be who you are, and that's the kind of clients you probably have at the same time. So follow whatever your client wants.
Yeah.
I also think, being on top of it when you're representing the seller and, when you haven't seen a request for repairs come through and it's, a week before they're supposed to lift their contingencies, make sure you're on top of it. Reach out to that buyer's agent and ask if something's coming in the pipeline. And then vice versa. If you're a buyer's agent and you're putting something together, even reaching out to the listing agent and saying, hey, it's going to be coming. I'm writing this, it's going to be happening. It'll help increase that relationship a lot and hopefully really open the door for a good, clean negotiation, right?
And a good TC will keep you on track as well as the whole transaction.
Yeah, that's good. So talk a little bit about that. What the benefits of having a TC and because I think this is one of the forms that it really helps a lot when you have a transaction coordinator, right? So kind of explain that to me, why you think that's important.
Well, considering I sleep with my transaction coordinator, I get updated. I get updated constantly. But.
It's true. Be clear, this is Shelly, his wife. We do not need any suits filed.
But yeah, we update almost daily, probably twice a day most times, unless we're just so tired of real estate and trying not to talk about it together. But you really need to know on a daily basis what's happening. Some TCs will send you an update via email or text, others once a week. But have a good relationship with your TC and just tell them, if I'm forgetting something, tell me about it, remind me about it, And they're good about that.
Yeah.
And they're good. They give you reminders, contingency dates that are coming up, and if they're missing documents here and there. It's a big help. It really is.
Yeah.
Because as much as you can be focused, there's a lot of moving parts and dates, and depending on what's going on, it's always good to have that other pair of eyes watching over everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Cross your T's and dot your I's.
Mm-hmm. Because remember, the last day your contingencies are supposed to be lifted is not a good day to send a request for repairs. Right. Just so everyone's clear that's watching this class right now.
Especially if your contingency date's shorter. Sometimes to get your offer through, you have to go, you're putting a 10-day contingency, and that goes fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 7. A lot of people are doing 7 to 10 right now.
7 days, right.
I've seen a lot of 7s. Yeah. Especially when they have an inspector, they know they can get out the moment that they open escrow, to be competitive. It's 30-day escrow with 7-day inspection contingencies. So it's difficult. Okay, well, we have just a couple of minutes left. So how about any last questions or thoughts or advice that you could give all of our agents watching that maybe are writing a request for repairs or maybe are responding to a request for repairs?
Angela had a question about the termite prior to. Rarely do I do it prior to listing. I think we talked about that, where I'll wait until we know offers are coming in to get it started. But if it's a situation where I can walk out the back door and see damage, the eaves are coming apart or whatever, then I'll suggest that they have it done up front, and just so they're aware, and maybe they can get some work done. Maybe they're going to cause a whole exterior trim to be painted, so then we'll do that ahead of time before we even hit the market. Mm-hmm. Curb appeal is still very important, even though it's a seller's market in most areas.
Mm-hmm. And lots of times you do the inspection, you don't necessarily have to complete the work, right? At least just do the inspection so that you know if it needs section 1 or if it's going to need section 2. And then they give you an estimate, right, about how much that's going to be. That way your sellers can anticipate that cost.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I said, how about any last words?
Oh, yeah. The only thing I was going to add is, especially with our KW offices, you have so much resources around you, so many great people that are there, willing and able. So, don't assume, don't need to like freak out over anything. You have agents, brokers that are amazing. Everybody's around you to help you. So, reach out. I think, everything's at your, you can deal with it and deal with it in the best way. Just, reach out to people, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of help.
Oh,
Across something that's a little, funky and you don't know what to do.
I know I review files or review offers before they go out on weekends and things for people, and I'm sure Rich does the same thing. And just we do everything we can. But if I'm not available, another agent in the office would gladly help. So it's open door, well, open Zoom or open text with everybody.
I like it. So any last thoughts besides reach out to your community? Maybe, be clear, be concise about what you're requesting and asking, be timely, right?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Remember that it's not reopening negotiation when you're in a seller's market.
Mm-hmm.
Buyer's market, you maybe can renegotiate and it's open that door a bit more, but right now don't. Buyer needs to be very reasonable. Otherwise, I'll go to the next one.
That's a good one. Okay. Well, I guess that's it, right? I guess we'll end a little bit early. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We appreciate always your expertise and advice to share with us. So hopefully everyone gathered a little bit more information today. I know I did, as always. But thank you for your time, and thanks, Stephanie, too, for your time. And we'll see you guys soon, right?
Yep. See you soon. Thank you, Amy. Thanks, Richard.
Bye, everybody.
Everyone.
The broadcast to Facebook.